Second edition of the YSC. My name is Moritz Fössler. I will be your host today, and I'm very delighted and excited to welcome a very distinguished panel here today. I cannot wait to engage in a constructive and open debate about the digital status quo and cybersecurity in Europe, as well as avenues, chances, and the future in this very interesting field. Before we dive in, I want to quickly invite you all again to follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and share our hashtag YSC21. Please note that this panel will last for 1 hour and 30 minutes until 5 p.m. and our closing remarks for the entire conference will follow right after. I would further propose a first-name basis with my panel here for easier communication. Without further ado, I would just jump right in and welcome our panel on our virtual stage. And I start with Vita Raciborzinska. She's an adjunct professor on NATO and transatlantic approaches to security, as well as global politics at the VUB in Brussels, and holds a PhD from University of Strasbourg. Her academic interests include hybrid threats, the relations between the EU and NATO and the Eastern partners, Russia and Central Asia, in the areas of energy, trade, and geopolitics, amongst others, obviously. I'm very pleased to welcome André Barinha, Professor André Barinha, as Senior Lecturer of International Relations and Security Studies, with a focus on the role of new technologies in European and overall security. And his focus is on cybersecurity and cyber diplomacy, in fact, specifically in the EU. And in 2019, he was awarded with the Global Affairs Award for Best Article for a co-authored piece with Thomas Renard on cyber diplomacy. Then Marc-Oliver Paal is with us today. He is Research Director at the Institut de Mines Télécom Atlantique in Rennes, France, and the Chairholder and Research Director of the Industrial Chair CyberCNI that focuses on cybersecurity for industrial applications. Marc-Oliver also heads the IoT Smart Space team at the Technical University here in Munich and does research on IoT, so Internet of Things, since 2008. And last but certainly not least is our very own Guillaume Clossard, founder of Europa Nova, and co-chairman of the high-level group on cybersecurity of the International Forum on Cybersecurity. He has been special advisor of the Vice President of the European Commission on Digital Policies. Monsieur Clossard currently serves as Honorary President of Europa Nova in Paris and Vice President of Europa Nova Germany, of our Europa Nova Germany board. So let's jump right into our topic of today. With the increasing hyperconnectivity of our world, we are witnessing an enormous and exponential expansion of the digital and cyberspace. Today, digitalization and cybersecurity often ranks second to climate change on the agendas of decision makers across the globe. This is also due to the transboundary nature of cyberspace, meaning issues spread from border to border, but also policy fields and dimensions of everyday life. Two main concerning developments regard the increasing interconnectedness of critical infrastructures and essential services, and the growing vulnerabilities of our societies. In this panel, we will follow 3 streams of questions. One will be new trends and the state of the security environments. We want to look at threats. Then we want to look at what is done so far, where we are, and talk a little bit about cyber resilience, cyber diplomacy, and ways of cooperating in cyberspace and across institutions and states. And the third point will be the future, a little outlook on the increased complexity and including malign actors in cyberspace, rising hyperconnectivity in cyberspace, and the fact that there are seemingly oblivious decision makers across states and institutions. For our first round of questions, each of you, our distinguished panel, can take a little more time, namely up to 5 minutes, to turn your answers into opening statements. And I will start right off with Vera. What Vera, what keeps you up at night thinking about cyber and hybrid threats, and where do we stand today? Maybe you want to expand a little bit on your assessment of today's security environment and the key trends.
Thank you so much for this invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. And of course, it's amazing to participate in such a debate today. So yes, very interesting question, because when we look at the security environment, we need to think about what will be in the future, what we expect, and what are drivers or key security drivers that we have right now in general. So if we look at foresight analysis, or in general, when we look at different threat assessment, we need to understand what are those key drivers and how we can assess them in terms of our member states perspective, for example, or in general when we look at future. So what we see right now, we see disintegration, and we also look at different perspectives from different states, and we see also geopolitical shifts. And right now in Brussels, especially when we look at a threat assessment or threat perception, we analyze that we need to find some coherent state of mind in order to align all these strategies and be together, be united against shared threats. And obviously, if we analyze all these different key drivers like interconnectivity or disintegration or divided values or different geopolitical shifts, we need to think about how we can align our strategies so we can be together against all these hybrid threats, or in general all these threats that we see, and how we can understand all of them, what are those important factors that influence. Obviously, when we look at the security environment, we see this uncertainty that is right now everywhere. We see also interconnectivity between different domains, and we need also to think about all different domains, and we need to look at diplomatic information and military and economic states of power, and we need also to think about how we can align our different national strategies. So when we think about the security environment, of course, it is complex, it is uncertain. We see more rapidly changing environment in geopolitics. So we see different ambiguity, different actors. And when we think about different actors, of course, we shouldn't forget non-state actors. And also, it is very, very complex, and there are different drivers and different vulnerabilities when we think about interconnectivity. And obviously, when we look at cyber domain, we shouldn't forget this interconnectivity with digital domain, and also how to turn this, for example, vulnerabilities into opportunities, and what we can do all together in order to cope with them. So we need to find proper strategy. So that is my introductory remark on this question.
Thank you very much, Vera. And I would turn now to Mark Oliver, asking you, after quite a while in this field as a researcher, what is the biggest cybersecurity risk for an average European citizen, what you think?
Yeah, also thanks a lot from my side, Moritz, for the invitation to this great panel with such great co-panelists. Very, very good question. So for me, you said it already in the introduction, the key thing that is happening for a longer time now is this digital transformation, so that we had physical processes before, and now we have processes that are controlled by software. And this is the root of all evil, so to say, because software has the big advantage that it can be changed after it has been deployed, which is cool because we can have over-the-air updates in our cars, for instance, with new functionality, or in our smartphones. But it's also a problem because if we have attacks, they can change the same infrastructure that we bought for a lot of money to run attacks against something. So at my chair, we look at cybersecurity for critical network infrastructures. So what are these critical infrastructures? Well, basically, it's most of the things that are surrounding us in our everyday life. So it's healthcare, it's water, energy, waste supply, it's communication, it's production, industry 4.0, it's transportation, it's defense, it's finance, it's research and education, it's agriculture. So it's really a lot of things where we might not even think that digital processes are involved. And therefore, the biggest risk for a European citizen for me is that this infrastructure that we are so used to have around us every day, that it's not working anymore. So this is the biggest risk. And what is causing it? Well, one thing that is currently very popular is so-called ransomware. We'll probably talk about it a little bit more later. That is basically rendering systems unusable unless you pay something to regain. So we had lots of cases with hospitals recently. We have power supply incidents and so on. The pipeline, the oil pipeline in the US 3 months ago was also a good example for that. Second thing that is risky for me as a European citizen is that my data gets stolen. So that someone gets my data. So in the simplest case, this is something like someone has my Netflix account and can use it, or my Amazon password, or whatever digital service I'm used to have. More severe is when my identity is stolen. So when someone impersonates me in order to do something. So there are several in German called Rufmord campaigns, so that your reputation is used against you and people are betrayed with that, or your life is even ruined with that. Third point I would say is surveillance, which could be stalking when it's from private people, or also like surveillance from a state, where you then in the end lose your freedom in acting. Another point that is also important, maybe fourth point, is social engineering. So we've seen it with the elections in Europe and in the US, that there's a lot of potential to influence people to say it in a neutral thing. Another thing that is more coming when we talk especially about European citizens, but it could also be citizens of any other area of the planet, is state-based attacks. So that we have cyber espionage, especially with companies, that we have this influencing the will of the people as we've seen it or see it for the votes. We have so-called cyber warfare that can be triggered by states, which is a problem because states have endless resources, and as Edward Snowden revealed, they can use them for doing attacks. So this is also an interesting dimension. We have this so-called artificial intelligence or machine learning that offers us totally new ways of running attacks. So this is also something important. And of course, we have these remote attacks. So Vera was already talking about it, and you were also talking about it, this hyperconnectivity, that basically from here, I can start hacking the components that are sitting in your room. If I'm successful, this works. I don't even have to move, which is also a totally new dimension. And of course, we have to do something. And so what we try to do there is to offer so-called security by design, which means that we implement security measures from the creation of devices till they are taken out of order. And so this was a little bit now the scope through what I find very important and very interesting.
Thank you very much, Mark Oliver, for these remarks. And I think that a lot of, not only since we focus on a European perspective on security policies, but also because a lot of what you just said, Mark Oliver, are pan-European challenges. I would like to ask Professor André Barinja. André, where do you currently see the EU as a cyber actor? Where does the EU stand on its cyber policy? What can it do? What did it do so far? And what's the status quo if we look at the European Union in terms of cybersecurity? We can't hear you. You are still muted. I think you are still muted.
I am.
Yeah, yes.
Thank you. I was saying it's a great pleasure to be here. Thanks very much for the invitation, Moritz. Answering your question, I would say the EU has so far gone through 3 different phases when it comes to cybersecurity. A first phase, which we could call the prehistory, that started in the mid-90s and evolved very slowly throughout the following decade, where cybersecurity was mostly connected to the safety of critical infrastructures and to fighting cybercrime. ENISA, it was at the time named the European Network and Information Security Agency, was created during this period. And then we have a second phase that starts to unfold in the late noughties. And obviously, we had by then some large profile attacks, such as the ones in Estonia in 2007 or Georgia in 2008, which caught the attention of a lot of policymakers around Europe. And here in the second phase, the idea of the EU as a cybersecurity actor, I think, starts to gain traction. We had the 2013 cybersecurity strategy. We had the proposal for the NIS directive. And we also had the creation of some organizations and agencies such as the CERT EU, which deals with computer emergency responses, also the Joint Cybercrime Action Task Force and the EC3, all with those two within the context of Europol to enhance the EU's capabilities in terms of cybercrime. So this phase also sees the EU paying more attention to the international dimension. And here I would highlight some conclusions of the Council in terms of cyber defense, but also the setting up of a cyber policy coordination within the European External Action Service. And the progressive inclusion of a cyber component in the EU strategic dialogues with the rest of the world. I would say we are coming now to the end of a third phase that started around 2016 with the launch of the EU Global Strategy, where cyber is abundantly mentioned. The EU Cybersecurity Act and the Cyber Diplomacy Toolbox, both approved in 2017, were also important marks during this period. This phase saw some of the proposals included in those documents, from the development of a certification scheme, cybersecurity certification scheme, to the development of a sanctions regime being developed and implemented during this period. Also, which I think is a period of maturation of the EU's approach as a cybersecurity actor, also coincides with the rise of disinformation, hybrid threats, as was already mentioned here, and emerging texts such as 5G becoming a central issue in international relations, but more specifically in EU discussions. If anything, I think COVID and the subsequent acceleration of the digital transition has further emphasized the importance of these matters during the period. And I would say we are now entering a new phase of the EU as a cyber actor, particularly in the international sphere. And this will be defined, I think, by 3 main aspects. And I would define them along 3 concepts: articulation, positioning, and deepening. First, in terms of articulation of cyber with all the other technological challenges and opportunities the EU faces. Rather than being a cybersecurity actor, the EU is and will be seen increasingly as a full-fledged digital actor, of which cyber is one of its core components. But it will be also closely linked with the digital single market, with data privacy, and with all the technological development associated with both of them. This seems to be the direction of the current Commission's digital decade, as far as I can understand. Second, and obviously related to the first, the EU will be called to position itself more firmly within the digital geopolitical landscape. And I think this is an issue of concern, not only because the EU is far from united on its relations with the US, China, and Russia, but also because a European digital third way, as many would advocate, a model that is neither American nor Chinese, may not be feasible in practice. Finally, this new phase will inevitably be marked by the deepening of competences at the EU level. in all its cyber-related measures, including diplomacy and, I hope, intelligence. Without so, I think it will be difficult for the EU to have a meaningful stance internationally. I would say, and this is my final point, that these three concepts, articulation, positioning, and deepening, are all interrelated. The success of one is dependent on the competent implementation of the other. A successful articulation of all the different digital components into a coherent policy framework can only work in a context in which the EU is able to successfully position itself geopolitically, which in turn will also involve the EU's capacity to show its teeth, something that can only be done with greater deepening of responsibilities at the EU level. And I would end here for now.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Andre. I would love to dive a little bit more into the last point that you made about deepening. But before we break up a little bit this session, I want to ask Guillaume, you've been special advisor in charge of AI and new digital technologies of the Vice President of the European Commission, as I said before. And for you, the question, the opening question, can the EU be a digital leader in cyberspace?
Hello, everybody, and hello, Moritz. So the question is, what are the conditions to be a digital leader? And if you have a look at the last report of CIA with regard to the world in 2040, they say a digital leader is a country which has its own digital infrastructure, such as clouding, and the access to the data, technologies, and the critical size to implement them, capacity to develop and attract sufficient skills, and strong cooperation between defense and private industry. If you look at these four criteria, Europe is not a digital leader. And Europe will not be a digital leader if we do not change. In the report, they say why it is important to be a digital leader: to capture economic value and also influence the way industries and economy are developing, first. Second, to influence public debate according to your interest. And third, to weaken competitors and to reinforce your national players or company. Is that the philosophy of the EU? I would say it is not at all the mindset of the EU, not at all. We remain very defensive. The US and China are very offensive. And I would say they consider cyber activity. And we do not consider cyber activity. So the question is, do we want or not to be a real player in this field? And I think the debate is open. If we look at what the European Commission is doing, I would say step by step, we have the beginning of a wheel. The objective of the DMA, the Digital Market Act, and the Digital Service Act are going in the right direction. We have developed a cyber diplomacy toolbox, but we have no initial strategy for cybersecurity. For example, Commissioner Breton is proposing to develop 12 transnational industrial ecosystem. Should we have a cybersecurity strategy in this field, it would mean that this 12 ecosystem would be cyber secure by design. These 12 European transnational industry ecosystem should be cyber secure by design. Another element, if we have a will in this field, we should put cybersecurity at the heart of the recovery plan. And there is nearly nothing about that. So I think the real question for us is to define what we want, where we want to go, and what we want to be in 20 years. And if we want to be a cyber power, we need to think as the American or the Chinese think. We need to have infrastructure, we need to have technologies, we need to be able to develop skills and attract the best people everywhere, and we need to have a cyber activity strategy. That's my introduction.
Thank you very much, Guillaume, and thank you all for your introductory remarks. Yeah, let's break up a little bit more all these different topics that we just talked about, and please feel free to interact also with the other panelists, ask your own question if there are any that you would have, I would hope for a really good debate here. I want to start with Vera and Andre, both of you, because first I really want to understand what we are dealing with, like what's the threat landscape out there, and yeah, what do we have to anticipate here? Vera, Russia seems to be responsible for a multitude of disturbances, ranging from disinformation campaigns to actual cyber attacks. What do you think is Vladimir Putin's game plan here, exemplary as the Russian president in this case? And then after that, Andre, maybe you could enlighten us a little bit about why Russia is not the only authoritarian country engaging in increasingly engaging in cyber disturbances. What makes this so widespread and so popular amongst especially authoritarian regimes in their pursuit of power? Maybe in this order, if you could answer these questions. Thank you very much.
Yes, so if we talk about Russia, we need to look at different implications here, because if we look at cyber, because we pay attention to cyber right now and cybersecurity, we see that Russia looks at cyber a bit differently than the West. And Russia pays attention to, let's say, it's they call it information security, and it implies for them not only cyber as we look at it in the West, but also disinformation, electronic warfare, psychological operations, and so on. And in general, right now, what we observe in security environment, we see this large attacks of scale, and of course, when we look at different attacks and analyze them, we think about what is impact of this attack and what are the security implications and how to deal with this, and how to understand what is behind of this actor if we look at objectives. So obviously when we analyze case by case, because there are different, of course, attacks, and there were very huge attacks, for example, on the infrastructure and hospitals. And recently we observed really different attacks, and they were all of a huge impact. So what we see in terms of objectives, if we analyze more or less what Russia would like to achieve, there are different objectives, and it's case by case. For example, if we look at certain case studies, we look, for example, at how Russia would like to gain some superiority, or how Russia would like to impede the decision-making process, or sow distrust. Again, we need also to think about different questions of instability drivers and how they can impact, for example, the West. So there are different objectives. What is important to understand that from Russia's perspective, Russia is in constant confrontation with the West, and we see that cyber environment becomes this sphere where we look at not only cyber as itself, but also disinformation and psychological operations, so how Russia influences, for example, a society. At the same time, we should understand that Russia would like to have this constant control of its own population, because if we think about digital domain or how Russia is using it, we need also to look at internal and external perspective. So internally, Russia would like to control the space and access to information for Russian citizens. At the same time, Russia is using different techniques, and there are different cyber attacks of large scale with different objectives. So what does it mean for us when we look at from the West perspective what we should do? Obviously, there are different strategies, and we can probably elaborate more later on, because we talk about, for example, right now, deterrence of denial or of punishment, how we can look at certain actors and what will be our strategy of resilience, and what other possibilities of engagement exist with those actors. There are also other interesting elements when we look at certain countries and see how they deal with Russia in cyberspace. And obviously, for example, if we look at the United States, we should see that, for example, this strategy of persistent engagement can work pretty well, but we should also think about what are those opportunities that can bring this strategy of persistent engagement, and how it can work in cyber. So we will elaborate more maybe later on different strategies of resilience and different case studies.
Thank you. Andre.
Thank you. Well, we need to understand that cyberspace is, it basically enables all sorts of actors, particularly states, to achieve strategic goals in a relatively cost-effective manner, something that was not as easy to achieve, for example, during the Cold War. And it also allows some states and some actors to punch above their weight, in the sense that, as Mark Oliver was saying, you can be disruptive with a relative little investment. So I think we need to have these two aspects in mind. And in that regard, I don't think there is anything specific about being authoritarian or not, right? I think everyone is playing the game. I guess the greater visibility that comes from attacks that come from authoritarian countries has to do with the higher level of reporting that we have in the West, where most of the attacks take place, and with the fact that that some of those attacks are of a certain level of recklessness, that they become all too visible to avoid. This to say that obviously these countries, authoritarian countries, are also often at the receiving end of attacks from liberal democracies. The key factor here, I think the key differentiating factor is exactly what Vera was saying, which is the role of information and the aspects related to the management of information and its use for strategic purposes. And I think this is an aspect in which authoritarian regimes have a far greater concern, or traditionally have a far greater concern, with the potential free flow of information and how to use information to control its own population and also to shape its strategic goals. What is particularly curious here, and I'll end up there, is that despite all these differences, we seem to be buying into that discussion in the West, and the way we are dealing with information seems to more and more resemble the way these other actors used to talk about information and the role of information for strategic purposes.
Thank you very much. Guillaume, you have a point here. You just raised your hand.
Yeah.
Something?
No, but I'm going in the sense of Andre, which is very surprising, is some Western players are thinking more or less as autocrat, I would say. If you look at the CIA report, that's very clear that there is a question, and that the cyberspace can be used in order to favor your interest and to influence the democratic space. And for us, I would say European, we have a strategic reflection to lead. What kind of cyberspace really do we want? how do we want to reinforce democracy? How do we want to protect our citizens? Should we consider that we should have a kind of cybersecurity right as it exists, a security right for citizens? This is a real political question, and this question should be led at the level of citizens, and this is not the case. There are discussions at the level of political leaders, but my feeling is there is a question of education by the media, by politicians, in order to have a debate at the level of citizens. And the second thing is we need to be clear that threats are coming from everywhere. Just to give you an example, we speak about China, we speak about Russia, but we also could speak about India, which is very active in the cyberspace, and the US also. And I think it would be very good to have a real understanding of who is doing what exactly, and this needs to be shared. Maybe it should be a responsibility of OECD to analyze and to publish figures, because all this has a lot of impact in the economic field. But I think the cyber question should not be a question of specialists. It should be a very political question, and everybody should be able to discuss it. And this is not the case.
It should be a very...
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I would either way turn to you, Mark Oliver, and you can then also add what you just wanted to say, because my next question would have been, okay, we have looked at the threat landscape, we have state and non-state actors being responsible for these attacks, but now I would have raised the question to you, Mark Oliver, who is responsible for the protection, looking at state and non-state actors. So we were talking about the European Union already. Guillaume just raised also the OECD as one organization being in charge. What about the role of the private sector, or generally like the balance between the private and non-private, the state's sector, in this realm of responding to cyber attacks? If you could expand a little bit on that and on your thoughts. And please add your remarks that you just had following Guillaume's.
Yes, I was just inspired by what Guillaume said, which I found very, very good. So what would interest me, and I benefit there also, like from being in the panel with these bright minds today, is, do you think, because I had the impression that in Germany and France, we are a little bit romantic or naive in the sense that it's like, oh yeah, nothing will happen, everything is fine. And it starts even with the companies. I mean, we have like espionage from when I think back at my time in Munich, it was like, okay, take care. If there are Chinese students working at night in the lab and copying your hard disks, it might be suspicious. And it continues with the Mittelstand in Germany, so with these small, medium enterprises and so on. The bigger companies are often more aware of that. And you just said, Guillaume, like the people are not aware of it. And so I'm 100% agreeing to that. This is also part of my mission, this education thing, that we have to raise more awareness of this threat and also the potential, what we can do against it. But my question would be, do we think it's like a top-down thing, that like in other countries in the authoritarian states, there's like some small circle that are directing these actions? Or is it deep-rooted in the society that they're like, okay, this is a normal tool that we have to apply, we have it in our heart, we can do it, and just in Europe we are not that minded in that direction. So this would be like an interesting question I would have. I don't know if you want to dive a little bit into that, or if I make my answer and then the others can also include that maybe in their statements.
Please continue shortly. Please continue shortly with your answer to the state and
Okay,
and
perfect. Yeah,
non-state
then I do
responsibility,
that.
because then I would have handed over the response maybe to Andre and Guillaume
Perfect.
to
Very
expand
good.
a little bit on that, one on the private side, one on the state side.
Then I take directly the link to that. So where do I see the responsibility of the state? So I see the responsibility of the state clearly in the direction of education. And the education is for citizens, it's for students, it's for workers, it's for companies. And for me, it's like cyber awareness. So the awareness of the threat potential and the need to do something against it, it has to be taught from the beginning. So for me, this is something that we should even include in elementary school, saying like, okay, our society depends on this information technology and there are cyber risks and you cannot feel it because you cannot see it, but the effects you can feel, and therefore the people are aware of it. Starting with, you should not publish all the stuff on Facebook and so on, but this is just an ultra small part of it. So the bigger part is really espionage, attacks, and so on. Pointing again to Edward Snowden, look at what he revealed, and you can be sure that now, like 10 years later, there's even much more, and it's even much more sophisticated, and it's accessible not only for states, but it's also accessible for private actors. I would see the need for the state, as Andre said already, in the direction of certification and standardization. So the state can say, we need certain security standards, and therefore we push that. So this is something the state would do. Third thing, I see the state in the role of a trusted third party. So collaborative approaches for security are a good thing. So we have to join forces in order to sustain these cyber attacks and these developments. And the state can be such a trusted actor. The Bundesamt für Sicherheit in der Informationstechnik in Germany, the CERTs, these are all actors that are state financed that are doing it. Further research, of course. So research is often state funded, European Union funded. It's important to invest. And as Guillaume said it, we have to invest in cybersecurity, because without cybersecurity, everything will break down. We make ourselves dependent on systems that are not protected against cybersecurity threats, because security is not selling. And this is a huge problem, and we have to see it, because it's nothing that we can implement later. We have to do it now, and this is very important. Private sector, so private sector, of course, also good and important, because at the end, the private sector has to implement the security, because the private sector is selling the products that are then creating the cybersecurity or not creating the cybersecurity. So services and products is to be created by the private sector. Solutions race for better security. And our own role is to also to raise this cyber awareness. And therefore it's great that you do the series today and that you raise this awareness with this panel. So this will be my distribution a little bit of the responsibilities.
Thank you very much. Then I would go to Andre and ask. So we were just talking about. I mean, for most of the time right now, we were talking about state actors, and what you just described, Mark Oliver, is something that is probably baseline for all the attacks that we are, or threats that we are faced with. But specifically, if we look again at states and their malign actions. The EU proposed and put out a cyber diplomacy toolbox with a sanction regime. And I would love to hear Andre's assessment of that, and then also maybe in response to what Mark Oliver just said about this raising awareness, where this would then come in. Andre.
Thank you. I think that the cyber diplomacy toolbox is a step forward in the EU's affirmation as an international actor in the cyber domain. I think, if anything, it gives structure to the EU's action in this realm, and also some certainty of action, both in terms of its member states, but also vis-a-vis the rest of the world. However, I think it is neither risk-free nor necessarily. It is not risk-free, and particularly when it comes to the sanctions component of it, which is one of the components of the toolbox, which goes beyond that. It is potentially not terribly effective. It is not risk-free because it can lead to unintended consequences regarding those who it responds to, and I think here there is the question that we can ask about how much is the EU, how much are EU member states willing to take some sort of reaction from those that it sanctions, but also because it can weaken its stance in cases of member states that do not agree, for example, with the imposition of specific sanctions. It shows division within the EU. Or also, even if there is union within the EU member states, there may be division when it comes to like-minded states like the United States or now the UK in terms of implementing or imposing some restrictive measures on third parties. So that these are all issues that I would associate with not being risk-free. But then there's also the matter of effectiveness. And here I understand that sanctions may act as a deterrent, but I think it is very far from evident that sanctions work beyond the mere symbolism of the act. Has any state ever changed its course in terms of actions in cyberspace because some of its citizens were given restrictive measures by the EU or the US when it comes to cyberspace? I don't think so.
Well then, I guess it's time to escalate a little bit and look at cyber defense, actually, and then I would turn to Vera and ask her about EU-NATO relations and cooperations, because there we would be on a military level. NATO is our alliance that is supposed to protect Europe against military threats across the globe, and now the question would be, where does the EU-NATO cooperation stand with cybersecurity? First of all. Second of all, also very important, I mean, there's obviously a conflict of competencies, because the EU is not a, first place, not a military alliance, but is rather focused on economic cooperation, traditionally seen. And NATO is the clear military actor, and now they are both working together, as it seems. Could you expand a little bit more on this cooperation?
Thank you so much for this question. So I just would like to elaborate more on Andre's point quickly, that which is really interesting to continue the discussion and have more debate. So I just wanted to add on that if we look at cyber and different actors, because we looked at, we discussed a bit on different actors, we see that cyber space is unregulated domain, and right now we see that many actors see it as a confrontational domain where we can look at engagement between different actors and how they would like to see the space as permanent confrontation, and where there is no distinction between wartime and peace, and we see that different actors are engaging in this space, and we need to think how to regulate it. And when we look at European Union and NATO's engagement, we see that right now we talk a lot about how these two institutions can help each other, can assist each other, and mitigate those risks, and also turn some opportunities and in the future in terms of strategy and align those strategies. So in Brussels, we discuss right now two questions: how we will align this threat assessment when we look at the strategic concept, the strategic compass, how we can look at different domains and see different opportunities. And at the same time, when we look at cyber, what we see right now, there are different discussions about strategies, and also how different actors can look at this domain and see what we can do in terms of regulation, in terms of also opportunities in the future, in terms of engagement, and also how we can look at aligned actors and how we can deal with them. So first of all, if we look at European Union and NATO, we see that they work pretty well, and cyber domain and hybrid, it started from Warsaw Summit, where there were discussions about more cooperation, less duplication, and how to engage better. And we see that if we look at the practical level, there were different, for example, exercises involved when the European Union and NATO participated in cyber coalition. There were also very good results from their exercises. There's also a question of how to look at threat assessment and also work together on this level and continue to expand this. Also, in terms of a strategic assessment, right now we think about how to liberate more on a cyber component in general, in terms of that European Union is looking at more regulatory domain, while for NATO is resilience, and also what is right now very, very important, it's a question about societal resilience, and in general questions of resilience of critical infrastructure and how to align those responsibilities. But again, when we look at practical level, what we see that the European Union and NATO right now, starting from Warsaw Summit, they were working all on early warning mechanisms, on a threat assessment, because when we looked at, for example, a coordination of intelligence, we saw that there is a coordination between different teams. And when we look at computer emergency, for example, response team and computer incident response team, NATO. So also there is situational awareness, which right now 2 institutions are working very well, and analysis of capabilities. And on practical level, we see exercises, training, and education. What we need to expand more, and where we have this potential in the future, is to look at how we can align strategies better in terms of threat assessment and information sharing and intelligence sharing, and also how we can, in terms of practicality, what will be our impact and how we can deal with malign actors. Because I think that our European Union is doing really very well, because there is right now a question of what to do with those actors, and how we can expand different areas, and how we can also think about beyond sanctions, what can be done. At the same time, we keep dialogue and we try to engage, try to understand different actors. And at the same time, we increase the level of our resilience. So we look at a strategy of deterrence by denial, and at the same time, we look at deterrence by punishment. We see what we can do with those actors, and what will be those methods to prevent them from doing those activities in cyberspace. But in any case, what we need to achieve, we need to regulate the domain. We need to think about how we can engage different actors, and it's not only institutions, it's also public-private cooperation, because we need to have more engagement with private actors, and also engagement with NGOs, engagements with academia, and etc. So I think partnerships with those actors will be very beneficial in cyber domain.
Thank you very much. And I also want to start to slightly turn a little bit into more prospective views on this, looking a little bit into the future. You just raised alignment, you raised how to deal with malign actors, and also public-private partnerships. Starting to look a little bit into the future, Andre, I wanted to ask you, if we go back to the European Union and the Europe-wide institutional architecture, what would be main obstacles that are on the road ahead, maybe going into the next phase? I think I counted 4 phases before. We are in the 4th phase. Yeah, can you give us a little bit of an outlook?
Thanks. So I think obviously there's a lot to unpack there, but I would return to my initial argument that the successful adoption of those 3 stances, policy, articulation, and I think this is really important as we speak, in the sense that the EU is trying to implement its digital decade, and so the articulation between cyber and all the other digital components that make part of that digital decade is fundamental. Then at the international level, the geopolitical positioning, and obviously that comes with the deepening of its competences. And here I would say the 2 main obstacles, one related with this deepening of competences and the other related to the articulation, regarding the deepening of competences, I would say the major issue has to do with intelligence and intelligence sharing across the 27 member states. I think that will be a challenge and will remain a challenge because intelligence agencies work along a different mindset from that of the EU. And the other aspect that I think it's quite relevant in terms of articulation, which has to do with the economy, really, is the fact that I think the economy is digitalizing faster than it protects against cyber threats. And how can the EU at the same time be leading as a cybersecurity actor across Europe while not impeding the European economy to grow? I think that will be a significant challenge that goes beyond cyber, but has, I think, cyber at its core.
Thank you. Mark Oliver, did we, by the way, answer your question that you raised earlier? I would have another one for you, also a little bit prospective, but I first wanted to check if we already covered that. You raised a point before.
So I would say only partially, because we didn't really answer if we would say there are some countries where we have a top-down strategy, or if it's like a deep-rooted in society movement for the cybersecurity. I don't know what your views on that would be.
I just see that Guillaume raised his hand. Guillaume, do you want to add anything to that? Otherwise, I would give the stage to all of you.
But yes, I want to try to answer to that, but also to what André said. I think it's really important that we take advantage of the European Recovery Plan in order to integrate reflex the cybersecurity dimension in information system. The reality is cybersecurity additional cost is more or less 10%, and nobody wants to pay. So we are developing our industries with a risk, and nobody wants to discuss. So for me, the question is not there a possibility to integrate this dimension in the different national recovery plan? It's not too late. It's not too late, and there is a lot of money which is not clearly well managed. Just to give you an example, and I think it should be a bottom-up effort. When the French National Cybersecurity Agency detected a breach on Microsoft Exchange, the agency contacted thousands of companies. Only 3.5% reacted. So it means that even when people are aware, they are not reacting. And without a bottom-up approach, but you need also to adapt the law. Maybe the national agency should have the capacity to force companies to adapt, but there is a question of cost. The level of reaction. So what should we do? What can we do? We can do things, but these practical topics need to be discussed and solved out. Otherwise, we are speaking very theoretically. So that is my point. There is a real responsibility to put the debate at the level of the stakeholders which are directly concerned. And these are citizens, these are companies, these are NGOs, etc. The debate is not at this level.
I would have also included now Vera into this, maybe also the question of top-down versus bottom-up. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, I would like to elaborate on Dio's point on cyber literacy, because obviously we need to invest on this, and cyber literacy should be obligatory, because we talk a lot about media literacy, but I think cyber literacy is something that we forget, and we need to invest in education, training exercises, but also to look at young generation and think about different approaches, how we can do this training exercises, education communication in different manner, because obviously it should be adapted to every generation. And when we look at different stakeholders, we also need to think about how to expand those stakeholders, because again, we talk a lot about European Union, NATO engagement, for example, and cooperation in this domain, and also aligning different norms and principles and setting up these norms in cyberspace and regulating the domain, and looking at different strategies between different member states and aligning them. But at the same time, we shouldn't forget private actors, because they have different mindset and they normally operate through thinking about economic interests. And we need to think about what will be, in this case, interesting for those actors, for industry to engage with other public sector and European Union and NATO institutions in general. And we need also to think about comprehensive approach and to look at different actors, different stakeholders that can be influential and can have an impact on cyber, and not to forget citizens, because in general citizens initiative and I think those initiatives that we know from the European Union, they will be very important here when we think about cyber domain. Because we need to understand how citizens can be, how they can engage with governments, and what are channels of communication exist between citizens and government. And we need to also think about question of trust and the question of engagement, and in general look at different stakeholders, not only those that we normally look at public sector or governments. We need to enlarge those stakeholders.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I would now turn a little bit and include a couple of questions from our audience. I would start with a very interesting one that I just see here on my screen, which comes from Roland Reif, and maybe that's a question for you, Mark Oliver. Chinese phones spied on users, and the collected private data was sent to China for evaluation. What can be done, or what could we do to prevent this?
It's a very good and very interesting question. So let me start with an anecdote. So a friend of mine who is much more a computer expert than mine, he told me one day, okay, I will try to create my own software for the phone, and then I will be independent of everything. And he's really skilled, and in the end, he started with Android, so because it's open source, partially at least, and in the end, he said it was too much work, he didn't do it. That means we will always have proprietary components within, and for these proprietary components, it's more difficult to say what they do. But all the communication that comes from your phone, you can, I mean, not on you, but maybe directly, even though technically you could, but your operator can monitor what is happening. And this is again where the state comes in. So if the state says the operator is obliged to look at such behavior, because there's then systematically lots of data from these phones that can be identified that is flowing to certain addresses in China, that should be detected, we could do that. Maybe to add to that, because there's also this problematic with the Huawei trial in the US now, which might be politically motivated or not. So there's always different views, and from the technical point of view, there are solutions for almost everything. The problem is more on the political side. Do we want to implement the solutions? And this would be my answer to it.
Thank you very much, and maybe we could just write as a follow-up to this answer and this question. This would be a question for the whole panel, but I would start with Andrei. An anonymous person asks, how do we boost national cyber capabilities when government cybersecurity develops much slower in comparison to private malicious actors? And I think that this also plays a little bit into what you just said, Mark Oliver. So how do we really get this step ahead in the sense of the state, international organizations, on a more political level, so to speak? Andrei.
I think we're better now than we were 5-10 years ago in that regard, in the sense that I think political actors are more aware of the issue, also because there's been quite a few high-profile cyber attacks, WannaCry, NotPetya, etc., that have shown both to decision makers but also to their electorate the potential negative consequences of cyber attacks. So I think we're improving. I think there's two issues. One is of political willingness, and as I said, I think in this regard we're getting better. But then there's also the issue of resources. In the European context, I think we have member states of very different sizes and with very different levels of investment and know-how in this area. And in that regard, I think the EU plays quite a crucial role, similar to what NATO often does in the defense area, in the sense of trying to set certain minimum standards, improving the equipment, response, training, and all of that. I think the EU can do the same in terms of cybersecurity regarding its member states, and I think it does, and I think it has improved, and I think ENISA has had its mandate boosted as well. There's this new center coming up in Bucharest, the competence center. So there's quite a lot, and in that regard, I think we're going in the right direction. But obviously, the question is if these developments are at the pace that is sufficient to respond to the increasing challenges we're facing. But in that regard, I think there's only so much you can do.
That is true. Time will tell. Guillaume, I have a question from an anonymous, from someone anonymous, and that is a question that I asked earlier. AI, artificial intelligence, chance or rather a risk if we go forward with cybersecurity? Would you like to comment on that a little bit more? I understood that you are engaged with that as well very much, and so I'm very interested in your opinion on that.
Well, Moritz, we are at the beginning of AI. We are at the beginning of AI, and with quantum technologies and the development of IoT, the question will be completely different, and the risk may be much higher. We are entering the society of deepfakes. It has a lot of meaning, and we are entering a society where it will be very easy to convince somebody that the reality is the one you want to show him. So AI is not bad or positive. It's what you are going to do with it. And the question is how the development of AI are going to be driven. I think there is a need for an international regulation of AI. The EU has developed an AI ethics, but we should have a global AI and not to use AI against humankind. And I think there are many stakeholders everywhere, even Western states, which are thinking on how to use AI in bad ways. So the real challenge is for me an international governance of AI in a positive way. In a positive way. But we can't speak only about AI. We need to speak about quantum. We need to speak about IoT. It's a wider picture. It's not AI in itself. It's AI in a completely, highly connected world. And we are at the beginning of connectivity, really at the beginning of connectivity. So there are many things we are not able to think now about the world of tomorrow, a deep fake society.
Thank you very much, Guillaume. I think that this was a very interesting answer, and I think it also plays into what Mark Oliver said before with the education and awareness part of it. We have another question here from Roland Reif, and maybe I would extend that question to Vera. National intelligence services of EU countries supported non-EU intelligence services, such as the NSA, in spying on actual European governments. Is there anything that we can do about that? Would you like to comment on this? The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for this question. So it's a tricky one because when we look at access to networks, sometimes some member states they don't respect capabilities because it's a question of intelligence. But in any case, I think that what we can do, we can look at the situational awareness and think about how we can exchange information in a specific way and collaborate in cyber domain and look at how we can increase resilience if we, for example, deal with malign actors. And when we think about, for example, malign actors, we need to elaborate on different strategies and deal with those strategies all together. But obviously, if we look at, for example, network access and also different offensive capabilities, what some states possess, we need to be concise and clear on this, because sometimes some member states, they don't want to reveal those capabilities. They don't want to say that they are on network, but again, we sometimes exchange on information and understanding what this actor possesses can also give you some intelligence signal and also some understanding how what it may be or what risks you have if you deal with this actor.
Thank you very much. I have a very interesting question here also on my screen, which I would open for the entire panel, actually. Speaking about, Samantha Mathieu says, speaking about AI, AR, IoT, and IT, state-of-the-art technologies and intellectual property. Do you see how to restructure on the WTO IT agreement and deploy it? Guillaume is smiling. Do you want to start? No, you don't. Anyone else? We have, restructure the WTO IT agreement. Question some experts on the WTO. Maybe Mark Oliver, do you want to expand a little bit, at least speaking about AI, AR, and IoT and the IT?
So I can very well expand on the technical dimension, but not on the WTO IT agreement, because I don't have it in mind in detail. But the relation between AI, AR, and IoT for me is very strong. So adding a little bit to what Guillaume said before with the AI, so what is the AI? The AI is for us a big possibility for increasing cybersecurity, because it allows us to do fuzzy analysis of data. What does it mean? It means that before we had heuristics, we had systems where we had to explicitly state how they should react under which conditions. With the AI or with machine learning, we now have the possibility to fuzz this, meaning that we can automatically analyze system behavior in order to detect attacks, and that's a big chance. At the same time, also attackers can use it, because as it's fuzzy, it can adapt to situations and can work also against systems. So it's both sides, as Guillaume already said. AR for augmented reality. So the biggest challenge with cybersecurity today, from a professional perspective, for me, is complexity. So we have highly complex systems, and this is also why AI is so interesting, or computer systems, because they can deal with a lot of complex information. Human brains, they can work very well with visual and audio information, and therefore introducing AR, so visualizations, can strongly help to raise this cybersecurity awareness. IoT is at the moment a big threat or attack vector. And why is it the case? Because we have highly limited devices. We have lots of devices that come from heterogeneous vendors. And these vendors want to be very cheap, especially in the home sector. And security does not pay off, because security is not visible. You see security when it fails, and therefore often those systems are not secure. And the problem is even when you secure your network and you have some IoT devices inside and someone is attacking those, the attacker is already in the system, giving it a lot more power to attack something. And therefore, for me, all three technologies are highly linked, and pointing once again to the role of the European Union and of the states. Security standards, interoperability standards, and openness are super important to win this cybersecurity challenge for me.
I would have a follow-up question myself, Mark Oliver. What do you think, because we were talking about this complexity, you just talked about this complexity, what would be something that you would say the number one thing maybe that decision makers on the political stage and others in this realm that are not practitioners, so to speak, in any IT field, what are these decision makers most frequently get wrong about when talking about cybersecurity challenges?
So I would say the first thing is what we talked about before, saying this a cybersecurity incident is not bad luck. So it's often something that is planned long term, and it's something that will probably augment, because with things like ransomware, where you take data hostage, where you take system hostage, we have now business models, so it gets attractive for states, for private people, and so on, for criminals, like the private people in that case when they do attacks. What often is forgotten, I would say, is that when you secure a system, the security of the overall system is defined by the weakest part of the system. And this weakest part is often the human. And that means even if I spend tons of money in securing a part of the system, if I don't spend money of securing the rest of the security chain, the investment is lost. Therefore, we need holistic approaches, and I would totally follow the others saying that education and raising awareness and integrating cybersecurity techniques from the beginning for those people that are dealing with this technology that offers these cybersecurity threats is where to start. And on top, we need also sophisticated solutions for the rest of the chain. But if we don't secure the human factor, because you also have heard that these hospitals, how were they attacked? Emails. People received an email, they clicked on a program, it ran, and then there was the attack. So holistic approach, this is the most important insight, not reducing complexity, because it's very complex to see the holistic approach to a system, but this is the way to go from it.
Thank you very much. I have 3 questions that I put into one, so to speak, or into one cluster, and then I would like every one of you maybe to comment on that a little bit, and then we are going towards the end of this panel, unfortunately. That question again concerns the EU's strategy or the vision, a vision for European cybersecurity of the future. Part of that question could be the cybersecurity strategy. There seems to be a renewal coming up. And yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts on a little bit more mid to long-term perspective over the next couple of years, 10 years maybe. To maybe again summarize what needs to be done, what are the key takeaways, and where do we go from here as European Union. And I would love to start with Mira on this.
Thank you so much for this strategic question. So again, I would start with resilience, because we need to invest in this. We need to think about societal resilience. We need to think about operational resilience, and I think about how we can regulate cyber and digital domains, because they are interconnected, and I believe in 10 years, we will have lots of developments and lots of challenges ahead. So we need to think creatively and strategically. Second item will be capacity building, because we looked at states, but we need to think about also different actors and how we can invest in capacity building, and also to think about risk assessment when we look at in cyber domain. What is this risk assessment, and how we can coordinate it better when we look at the private public connectivity in cyber. So we need to think about risk assessment. Obviously, investment in cyber literacy, education, training exercises, and thinking about next generation. This is obviously very important. And we need to think about the cyber literacy and investment in the young generation and education. and also how to deal with these malign actors. And this is very strategic question, because we looked at how we can increase, for example, this attribution, how we can regulate better, how we can, for example, think about a sanction regime, or what will be as a strategy, and how to deal with these malign actors. That will be, of course, a question of coordination between different governments, because we need to think at the same time, and we need to engage with different actors, and we need to think how we can deal with those actors in 10 years. So what will be our strategy? But obviously, increasing political consequences, increasing attribution, those items will be still on the table. But then we need also to go to think ahead, because different actors, they see different potential in cyber, and we know that cyber is the domain where we need to look how it will develop itself, and we need to think creatively. So there are different items and different possibilities, but again, I think a shared risk assessment and shared strategy will be the first step ahead.
Thank you very much. I would turn to Andre.
Thank you. I think I overall agree with Vera's remarks. I would probably just add the international dimension, in the sense that a way of dealing with cybersecurity issues is by reducing the number of attacks, and one way of achieving that is by creating an international environment in which all states are willing to push forward an agenda of cybercrime reduction, and in that regard, the negotiations and discussions that take place at the UN level, both in terms of responsible state behavior within the context of the first committee, but also now in terms of a potential creation of a cybercrime convention within the context of the third committee, are very important, and raising awareness of those, I think, is quite important, so that more and more stakeholders participate and contribute to those discussions. I think quite a lot of the problems we have start in that lack of international responsibility in this realm, and so I think this is a dimension we should also be looking at from the European perspective.
Thank you very much. Mark Oliver.
So
maybe if I may add something in specifically for you, would be a little bit your stance on, or your definition. Maybe you could add that, your definition of cyber resilience, because that's what also Vera was saying before, and that would have been also on my slightly longer list for today with questions that we probably can't do anymore here. But the cyber resilience part would be very interesting. Thank you.
So let me start with the cyber resilience. So Vera was already mentioning a lot of aspects. So this risk analysis, this threat intelligence, this collaboration, which are all tools to increase this cyber resilience. And what is the cyber resilience? So typically one has three aspects. So the first one is the information security, so securing the information systems, so the IT and OT systems that we have out there. The second aspect is the business continuity, because resilience in the end means that I am able to provide the internet operation even under adversarial conditions. So that means when I'm under attack, my water supply, for instance, is still working, maybe at a reduced level, but it's still there, or I still have at least some electricity that is available. So information security, business continuity, and also organizational resilience. So again, this holistic approach that we were talking about before, that we need, plus also this aspect of being attack tolerant, because attacks will not go away from today to tomorrow, and therefore we have to take them into account when designing the systems, bringing us back to this security by design approach. So now to your other question regarding what role can the EU play? So I would say the EU can play a leading role there if they do something together. So the COVID was a big chance. So if they would have deployed one app, the people might have seen, wow, it's cool, EU is there. Cybersecurity is the next chance, and it's also a very big threat. And therefore, for me, the important thing is that they have to do something together. They have to empower their citizens, companies, governments to be aware of it and also to do something against it. So this would, for me, be the role of the European Union, or the chance for it.
Thank you very much. Let's turn to Guillaume, the vision for the future of the European Union in cybersecurity, and maybe again also to you a little bit on cyber resilience.
Okay, maybe just a last reflection, which is we speak a lot about digital sovereignty. I think there will be no digital sovereignty without cybersecurity at the heart, and this is something very, very important, and I think it should be included in all discussion with regard to digital sovereignty. Now, with regard to the room of the EU, maybe in the international arena, I believe there is an opportunity to play a role. There are two kinds of stakeholders. On the one side, you have the US and a certain number of states who consider that we have not to change the regulation of the digital space. And on the opposite, you have China and Russia who want new rules, and somehow they want to forget, I would say, the European or the global acquis in terms of digital governance. And I think the European and maybe the French presidency of the Council of the EU need to conduct a debate on what a third European way could be, and how we could go ahead. And for me, we need to promote a certain number of principles for the future of the digital space at global level, such as a pacific use of networks and information systems, the safety of critical infrastructure in the field of health, energy, etc., preventing hackback and rules in this field, and maybe the due diligence of states accepting illegal activities on their territories having negative consequences for other states. And this could be a core of fundamental principles for the cyber age that the EU could bring in the international arena.
Thank you very much, Guillaume. And like a Swiss clockwork, we are closing this session very much on time. I have a range of other questions, but these have to wait, I guess, unfortunately, until next year. I want to thank each and every one of you for your participation. I hope you gained as much as I did from this very interesting panel. This field is going to remain very exciting, full of surprises, I guess, over the next years, but hopefully positive ones. And I hope that we cross paths maybe at the next conference again. And again, very, very much thank you to each and every one of you for your participation. I will remain on stage now to welcome again my friend and colleague Amélie for our closing remarks. Because that's it with the YSC. Amélie, we did it.
We did it. We did it, Moritz. I can't believe it. Can you?
Yeah, I did. What did you like about our conference?
That's an excellent question. Yeah, it is an excellent question. I would say, in general, this feeling that we succeeded in developing the second YSC happening here in Munich at the America House, and it was amazing. It was a unique experience, actually. We organized during 2 days such an amazing conference with many panels, with many fellows, with young participants, with an amazing team. And yeah, I express my gratitude once again to all of us, to you, Moritz, that we were able actually to build up such an amazing energy, such a productive and constructive vibe, especially considering after 1 year of pandemic with so many complications.
That is true, and it would not have been possible without our great team, and obviously without the America House here in Munich and its great team. We had an amazing venue here, where everything seemed to have worked flawlessly over these days. I'd like to extend our special thanks to Mrs. Zwingenberger and the entire staff here at the America House, but most of all to all our partners, amazing partners that we have.
Yeah, totally. And Moritz, what did you actually like?
I mean, first of all, the venue, the exchanges. We had the opportunity to have a couple of amazing, distinguished guests on our panels. Each and every one of them was terrific and very insightful debates. I hope that obviously next year we can go back to attendance, and we could go back to having an audience where then interacting with the audience is a little bit more intimate and personal, obviously, also here on stage. But for the fact that we are still in these very tough times, this has been an incredible conference. And I think that, yeah, it always sounds so stereotypical, but the people made the conference once again. And yeah, ranging from the team here, our team, the panelists, and everyone watching from wherever you are. So yeah, that was amazing. What comes next, Amelie? This has been 21, YC 21. Obviously, the next conference next year, that is maybe not so far away. If we look at going back to having this conference in February, March, this would be roughly half a year. But there's other things in the pipeline.
Yeah, so the YSC actually is not only young, it is intergenerational and innovative, as we mentioned many times during those 2 days. And it tries actually to respond to the challenge of international politics, policy, and polity, meaning that we foster dialogue in the long term. So we'll come together with all the fellows that we met this morning, and we will talk about many different topics related to European strategic autonomy. And we'll have a workshop on transatlantic affairs in October, and another workshop in December. And as Moritz just mentioned, we'll have the next YSC next year. And in the meantime, also we'll work on publications and do many things together with the fellows, with the new cohort of fellows joining us for the next year. And yeah, so many things will be ahead of us, and I'm looking very much forward to it, especially since we developed our think tank and founded Europa Nova in Germany only 3-4 months ago.
That is true, and we also extended our network of partnerships, and at this point I think we both want to thank all of our partners. There will be more coming up. There's a lot in the pipeline, and I just want to use this moment, but also to specifically thank you, Amelie, for everything that you did for this structure, for Europa Nova Germany. Without you, this would not have been possible, and everybody on the team knows that. Amelie is heart and brain of our organization, and yeah, thank you very much on behalf of the entire team. And I think that's it. That's it. That has been the YSC 2020-2021. Now I'm already like the European Championship. We did not postpone it, but this time we had an amazing virtual conference. And next year in attendance then, hopefully.
Yeah, and follow us on our new website, on our website, Europa Nova Germany, which will be released soon too, on our social media channels, etc., etc. So stay tuned, be with us, and see you very soon.
Yeah, thank you very much.